Hi again. So this is going to be our coverage of chapter 10, which looks both at cocaine and methamphetamine. I will be going over the highlights of these chapters, but again, you should be reading them to make sure that you are following along with the material. And in the PowerPoint, you might see some areas where I've kind of left things blank or asked questions that allude to the material. So make sure that you are reading those chapters as you go through. My biggest piece of advice would be to read the chapter, take notes, look at the PowerPoints I've made you, and then try to see where there's the correlation between the material. This will help you study and prepare for your exam, and just to retain the material, I hope. So we're going to start with chapter 10. Again, this is going to be cocaine and meth, but we're going to look first at cocaine. And so the introduction, you probably already guessed who it was when you were reading it, but if not, you should know by the picture that is Sigmund Freud. So the history of cocaine, again, is long and varied. And so coca comes from the coca shrub, and it is used to produce cocaine. It is produced, so it's been in one location predominantly, but now it's being cultivated elsewhere, and you'll probably recognize the locations once I tell them to you. So they have to be in high altitude rainforest and fields in Peru and the Bolivian Andes. However, I'm sure it comes as no surprise to you all that Colombia is now harvesting the same crops and cultivating cocaine. I think if I were to ask you which countries you associate with cocaine production, that Colombia would probably be at least in the top 5, if not number 1. So there is a history of the Spaniards discovering these leaves and chewing on them to have energy. At the time, though, those leaves only contained 2% of cocaine, and it was referred to as a gift from God because it gave them energy. So there are Peruvian men, approximately 2 million, which represents 90% of the population there, who contain, or rather create, a mixture of coca, ash, lime, and chalk, and they're going to chew that. And these men are called, I hope I don't mispronounce it because my Spanish professors would be so upset, but aculeadores. It's probably wrong. In any case, that's what they refer to as. You might want to know that for the test, just know how to spell it. It does not actually produce a large amount of abuse among users because it's a low dose of cocaine actually within that substance. However, they also have bazucos, which are cigarettes, and they've kind of manufactured them from the coca leaf, but what happens is in the refining process, they also, they don't mean to, but they inadvertently mix it with kerosene and gas, and then ether, and so that is also within the cigarette they produce. So they're smoking all of that and inhaling that. So it is much more dangerous to use bazucos than to chew the leaves and that creation they've manufactured essentially. All right, let's look at coca and cocaine in the 19th century. Again, the Spaniards brought them back to Europe, but they were ignored for 300 years. It's so strange to think that a lot of these drugs have been kind of introduced throughout history a long time ago, and then ignored, or we maybe see a dip in their usage and then popularity again. So Albert Niemann was the one who named the substance cocaine. In the United States, if you were to search it too on Google, United States and cocaine in the 1800s, you'll see that it was actually over the counter and you could just get it to use for toothaches and other ailments. And then a lot of authors and creative folks attribute their creativity and the success of their work to using cocaine. So the author, Robert Louis Stevenson, who created Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, attributed cocaine, or attributed his inspiration rather to cocaine, so that was his muse. And then Sherlock Holmes, if you ever read Sherlock Holmes or watched any of the many shows that have come about or movies, you'll know that Sherlock Holmes also had an issue with cocaine usage, but it did give him a lot of energy and creativity. And so sometimes, in at least the show that I referenced here on there, Elementary, which I love, if you haven't watched it, it's very good, he battles that throughout, and that's how he meets his Watson, which, long story short. All right, so then we see that it's going to be commercialized. First, by Angelo Mariani with his drink, which he just takes coca and wine, and he calls it Vin Mariani. On the picture on the left there, you can see that I included that. It is going for over $1,000 on eBay, so people really, I guess, did attribute this to a popular drink. Frederick Bartholdi, who was the creator of the Statue of Liberty, he wrote Mariani a letter saying that if he had been using cocaine at the time he created the Statue of Liberty, that would have been much taller and more extravagant. And then John Pemberton in the U.S. Makes French wine cola, and essentially what happens is he makes this variation. It creates Coca-Cola. So the same Coke you drink today, but a little bit different because there was coca in it. And they did attribute it to stimulating your brain. So kind of like we see today with a lot of sugar, Coke, oh my gosh, sodas that have a lot of caffeine in them. That was kind of the effect that it produced. However, in 1903, once people started to recognize the dangerous effects of coca and cocaine, they were removing those leaves from the drink. So now when you're drinking it, of course, it's going to not contain that. Medical use, it was used for anesthesia, and then Sigmund Freud became obsessed with it. He even wrote a book about it. And he said his depression was cured by it. So whenever he was feeling depressed and he used cocaine, he would instantly feel better. He'd have a rush of energy and euphoria, and he thought it was the best drug in the world. He even sent it to his fiancée, his sisters, friends, family, etc. as gifts. However, he had a friend, and I'm probably going to mispronounce his name. It's German or maybe Austrian, but it's Fleischl. And Fleischl also used a lot of cocaine, and he started to experience formication. If you've never heard of formication, basically it's a sensation and the belief that there are bugs crawling on you and in your skin. It could also be snakes or something along those lines that's crawling all over your body. So you're going to itch, you're going to have hallucinations. There's actually such a thing as cocaine psychosis. And that's what his friend Fleischl suffered from. He actually suffered a long time, I think like 4 to 6 years before he died ultimately. At that time, though, of course, as you can imagine, Freud was witnessing this. He knew that his friend died, and he changed his mind about cocaine. Now, you should also know that if you mix cocaine and alcohol, it increases your risk of dying significantly. You are actually 18 to 25 times more likely to die than using either substance alone. And so the reason for this, just from cocaine alone, you can have abnormal heart rhythms, labored breathing, and increased blood pressure. And I believe I told you, if you were in class that day, about my husband knowing someone who had tried cocaine in front of him, and she died immediately from a heart issue that she didn't even know she had. However, when you mix it with alcohol, it has a synergistic effect, and so it increases the half-life of cocaine, meaning it'll be in your blood longer. You will have increased euphoria, which is great, but you also run the risk of dying, and that risk is elevated, as I mentioned. The problem is, if you ask people who use cocaine how often they use alcohol or they mix the two, 62 to 90% of cocaine users also mix it with alcohol, so very, very dangerous. Now, cocaine has been used as a party drug. It's usually associated with euphoria. However, we do know that one of the biggest problems is that when you stop using it or until the levels of cocaine in your body decrease, you're going to eventually feel irritable and a high level of depression. So much so that actually people report having a fear of cocaine users succumbing to suicide or suicidal ideations that are very strong. And so just to give you some tidbits, even though it's in the textbook, in 1985, 1 in 5 suicides in New York City were correlated with the victim's use of cocaine. And some people report that it can be an aphrodisiac. If you don't know what that is, basically it can increase the sexual pleasure one might encounter. So for men, it's been reported to extend erections, and then for women, they have been rumored to have multiple orgasms from using cocaine. But the textbook also points out an issue where you might have an expectation of that happening, and then it might not happen. It will increase your heart, as I've said, your heart rate rather, your breathing, but it will decrease your appetite, and it can lead to cerebral hemorrhaging, which can obviously kill someone, or congestive heart failure. And then police have talked about recognizing when somebody's on cocaine because of a driving pattern. They call it driving diagonally, which is quite interesting and unique to cocaine. Know the chronic effects, the medical uses, but also know that ear, nose, and throat doctors prefer to use other anesthetics instead of cocaine for maybe some obvious reasons. Cocaine is going to enhance the dopamine in your brain. It's also going to increase the euphoria that you feel. But you should know about the kindling effect. It is the opposite of tolerance. So where tolerance, you need more and more and more to feel the same effect. With kindling effect, from certain drugs, you can experience heightened sensitivity to repeated drug use, which means that lower levels, or lower doses rather, can actually produce stronger effects, and you don't know when that's going to happen. So this can lead to death, even among somebody who's been using for quite a long time. For present day cocaine abuse, just know general facts about it. Know the difference between the cocaine and crack medical emergencies. Again, we're seeing that this is going to increase in overdose deaths because of synthetic opioid synthetic opioids being mixed or contaminating the crack cocaine and cocaine. So if you want to receive treatment, or somebody wants to receive treatment for cocaine abuse, they talk about this really profound effect that happened in the 80s, where people were calling 1,000 people a day from a 7-year period, from 1983 to 1990. And the demographics significantly shift among users. So in 1983, the average user was college educated and employed, earning more than $25,000 a year, and they were taking it by snorting it. But then in 1988, the average user had not gone to school and was earning less than $25,000. So it's quite interesting. The first part of treatment, though, is that the person must go through complete detoxification and abstinence, and this can take anywhere from 24 to 48 hours, if not longer. But the first time when that's happening is going to feel awful for them. They're going to have really profound depression, like we've mentioned already, with the link to suicidal ideation and suicide attempts. They also will have extreme headaches, which sounds miserable. They'll be irritable, and they'll have trouble sleeping. And they can do a number of different treatment modalities: short-term, long-term, inpatient, outpatient. There's also Cocaine Anonymous, so people can go and seek advice and support from people who are struggling with the same drug. We'll move into amphetamines and then eventually methamphetamines, so I'm going to go over this pretty quickly. The person who introduced or discovered this drug